Hello everybody, welcome to the latest edition of A Peek Behind the Curtain. Today I'm going to be discussing, in no general order, movies that I think have been influenced by the philosophies that I put forward in a number of my books. It doesn't mean that these movies have in any way been influenced by my work, which would be impossible because many of them came out years before, but I'll just be talking a little bit about how these ideas are ingrained within society, and my writings seem to be just highlighting them. So we'll come back to that a little bit later on. But for the moment, I'd just like to discuss, make an announcement as well. I know that many of you in the UK have been waiting for the publication of the new book, my new book, The Near-Death Experience, which was scheduled to be published on the 1st of December. Sadly, there's been issues with one of my publishers, the UK publisher Arcturus, and what has happened is the distribution company, the people that warehouse all their books, have gone into liquidation, which effectively means that the books need to be transferred from the original company that did the distribution of them to a new distribution company. Now, sadly, the books are in no particular order and are very, very random. They're in boxes all over the place. They told me there was somewhere in the region of around about, I wonder whether it was 180,000 or 800,000 books that they have to go through to find mine. Now, as is normal in my life, when I'm not the luckiest of individuals, of course, I'm the author who has a new book coming out when this situation has arisen. Now, I've had discussions with Arcturus, and what we have agreed is that just to confirm as well, that the Audible version of the book is available in the UK, as is the Kindle version. So these you can buy on Amazon, for instance, and I think there's a Kobo version as well, so you can buy those as you can in America, and in America all three versions including the paperback are also available. But in the UK there's a slight problem here in the sense of the paperback. So what we've agreed is that they will try and get hold of some copies for me in the intervening period, and we have agreed that what we will do is we will delay the publication of the paperback until March of next year. Now, what this will mean in practice is that I will be able to get hold of copies of the book. Either we'll re-import them back from America and put a sticker on them with the new ISBN number, the UK ISBN number, or they'll find ways and means of printing off a special run for me. Now, what this means is that I will have available to me copies that I can sell from my website from the period I receive the books until March and the publication date, which means that if any of you are keen to get hold of advance copies before publication date that you'd like to read, you can order them directly off my website, and I'll be working with my web designer to create a new page in the books for sale section of my website. And I know many of you have bought books off my website in the past, and indeed what we'll be doing is we'll be reproducing what we did with my last book, Cheating the Ferryman, whereby we had many copies available that I had here that I was able to sell off the website, and I then post them and send them out to you. Now, the advantage of this to you is that the cost is no different than if you went into a normal bookshop, so there's no greater charge. The only charge you have is the postage costs, which unfortunately are going up and up all the time, but there's nothing I can do about that in terms of that cost. Now, what I've also agreed with my publisher is, in order to make it more attractive, now in terms of the attractiveness buying them off me, is that if you are interested you get a signed copy, and I also will write a personal dedication if you want me to do that as well. So you'll end up with a personal copy of a book with my signature and a comment if you wish me to put them on there. I also number the books as well, so that you know the first one that is ordered, and it is just a first come first served basis really in terms of this. But also, much to my delight, Arcturus have actually said that they will also print off a limited number. We don't know how many yet, maybe a few hundred bookmarks, paper bookmarks, and these will be individualized to the book. And I'm also happy to sign the bookmarks as well. Now, these will be unique. They won't be available anywhere else. You can only get hold of these if you purchase the book directly. So at least that gives you something that is unique if you do decide to buy the books off me. And to be honest, it really does help me if you buy the books off me, because I do make a little bit more money than if it goes into bookshops and everything else as well. But it's personally your choice altogether. As I say, the major problem is the postage costs. Indeed, for the UK, it's not too bad, because the book, I've designed the book they have designed the book in such a way that its weight and size is cheaper to post. But the cost of posting to America, which we discovered last time, has now become ridiculously expensive, almost to the point that the cost of the postage is nearly the cost of the book when people are buying. So I'm not surprised that the number of books that have been ordered off my website is not quite as great from the United States as it used to be. But also, if anybody is interested, I'm also planning to do probably 2 launch events as well. I'm in negotiations. My good friend Vitaly Viteliev, the writer, who has been a guest on my own podcast, a wonderful writer, by the way. Check out his work; it's really great. And Vitaly has negotiated with David's Bookshop in I think it's Garden City. Not quite sure. I'll check that and I'll confirm that. Could be Letchworth. I think it might be Letchworth where the bookshop is. And I'll be doing an event there. I did do a book launch there a few years ago as well, and we had a fairly good turnout. But I'm aware of it's quite difficult sometimes to get to a place like that. So I'm also hoping that Watkins Bookshop in central London will also do a launch event. They've kindly done a number of my previous books. As you know, I'm also published. I have a number of books published by Watkins, but they also very kindly allow me to do launch events and talks at the bookshop as well, which, if it goes to plan, will be videoed in the same way and will be uploaded onto their website. But I'll let you guys know of the dates and times of that when they take place. So that's really the breaking news at the moment. So just to be aware that is the problem. My sincere apologies. Arcturus are apologising like mad to me as well, and I completely understand. It really isn't their fault. It's just the way the circumstances are. It's just one of these things. But now let's move on a little bit to movies and films. Now, many of you will know that I'm a great film buff. I adore movies, just like I adore music and lots of other things. But I'm particularly interested in the philosophy of music and of movies. And I remember a few years ago I did an interview or an exchange of ideas with my good friend Martin Higgins on his podcast, which again I will put a link to because it's well worth watching. Again, it is still available, where he came up with the term the ontological movie. That is, movies that deal with the question of being, the question of what we are, why we're here, and the mysteries of what is consciousness, what is life, everything else as well. And over the years, there's been many movies that have based upon these themes. But what I always find fascinating is how many of these movies pick up on themes that are directly central to my own Cheating the Ferryman hypothesis. Not just Cheating the Ferryman, but the other ancillary sub-hypotheses that are also found under the Cheating the Ferryman umbrella, such as the Damon-Eidalon dyad, the Huxleyan spectrum, and the Bohmian IMAX, and various others. And I will touch upon these as we progress through this discussion, this presentation, whatever we want to call it. But really, one of the films that really affected me when I first saw it, and probably was one of the films that probably subliminally got me interested in writing and looking into this subject, was a film that came out, I think it was in 1944, by Pressburger and Powell, the great British filmmakers of that period. They were responsible for films such as The Black Narcissus and various others. But the really good film that is well worth catching if you've never ever seen it, and so many people have, is A Matter of Life and Death, which in America I think came out under the name of A Stairway to Heaven. which I'm sure probably Led Zeppelin were aware of that in one way or another when they brought out their incredible song. And by the way, as an aside, as also a great music fan, I was fortunate to be caught Led Zeppelin when they did their tour in 1970 or 1971 possibly at Mountford Hall in Liverpool, when they were doing the tour just before the release of the Led Zeppelin 3 or the Ruins album. And of course Stairway to Heaven is on there, and I was right in the front of the audience when they did Stairway to Heaven. And it was an amazing experience. You knew you were witnessing a song that very few people had heard, and you knew that it was a work of sheer genius. And I'm always very, very proud of being involved in something like that, to be there and see that as it took place, and seeing Robert Plant singing the song and Jimmy Page doing the amazing guitar playing on it. And of course, not to denigrate John Bonham and John Paul Jones as well, and John Paul Jones, excellent bass guitarist as well, but an aside, as it always is. But the thing is as well that a lot of these ideas are ingrained, what I believe, in the zeitgeist. They're things that we know subliminally. We are aware of these things. And this is the thing, I think, why my writing resonates with so many people, because we sort of know that this is the way it is. And there's something deep inside us that knows this is the way the universe functions and works, and what happens at death. And again, one could argue that if my Damon Eidolon dyad argument is correct, that's the demonic consciousness leaking through to the eidolonic consciousness that makes us aware of these things. And that's why these movies resonate so much. And indeed why filmmakers and writers are so interested in putting these ideas across in the way they do. But going back to the Pressburger and Powell movie, again, it's a fascinating film in that it deals with death, or lack of death, because the central character, who is a bomber pilot, was supposed to die. And he doesn't. And he causes problems in heaven because he survives. He jumps out of a burning aircraft, and he should have been taken to heaven and doesn't. So there's one person missing in heaven. So this angel, or this accountant kind of person, is sent back to earth to find him. And the gentleman in question is David Niven, the great British actor. And that's the basic premise. But there are all these kind of really intriguing ideas that are thrown around in the movie. And one of the things that really struck me was, I think it was the first time I'd ever seen freeze frame used in a really interesting way. The idea that time is relative, the idea that we perceive time as a flow, but time can stop, because there's this incredible sequence where two of the characters are playing table tennis. And suddenly they freeze because there's something happening in the greater universe, and they freeze. And David Niven realizes they've frozen, and he's walking around them. And it's almost in many ways a very early precursor of those amazing freezing sequences that you had in the movie The Matrix, which, funnily enough, the guy that designed that was one of my fellow presenters at Contact in the Desert in California last year. So, but Pressburger and Powell were way ahead of this in the way they did it. So that was a really interesting movie from many, many years ago. But carrying forward, I'm going to focus in on 3 or 4 movies, maybe a few more, and just point out where I think the itladian, the term itladian I use is the overall umbrella statement. And if people wonder what I mean by itladian, it's literally just the initials of my first book, Is There Life After Death, which is itlad. And anything that's related to the themes there, myself and my friends and my associates call itladian. So this is it. The itladian movies. But of course, the greatest itladian movie probably, and the one that really is the reference point for all others in terms of this, is Groundhog Day. And in Groundhog Day, there are so many themes there that I write about and do the science of, and do the support, the psychology, the neurology of this. Now, you will recall, it's such a famous film, and it was originally written, the script was originally written by a guy called Danny Rubin, And Danny Rubin is a lecturer was a lecturer at Harvard University. And Danny, I've spoken to Danny on a couple of occasions in terms of what motivated him to write this book. And indeed, one of the saddest things, is a double sad thing, is that I interviewed Danny Rubin when I started the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour many years ago, when I was working with my great friend Radia Nunez, who sadly died 3 or 4 years ago, quite tragically. And the double frustration was, and it's not Dia's fault, but a number of those recordings that were recorded on Dia's site. She used a particular platform which is only semi-functioning or not functioning these days. So the videos still exist and the recordings still exist, but I can't get hold of them because I don't have Dia's password and nobody else has Dia's password, so I can't get into them. One of the recordings that was lost at that time, or it wasn't lost, exists, but I can't get to it, was an interview I did with Danny Rubin, which was probably one of the most enjoyable interviews I've ever done, for different reasons, because Danny had such a fantastic sense of humour. And his sense of humour, if you ever get the opportunity, and if I can find a way of releasing this, I will do, because his sense of humour comes up in the movie all the time. So in it, basically, you have a central character called Connors. And Connors is a very negative weatherman. And every year he goes down to Punxsutawney in Pennsylvania to do Groundhog Day in February. And the Groundhog Day basically there is a little creature called a groundhog, which is kind of a ground squirrel or something. And Punxsutawney Pete, he's called. And what they do is they wait to see if he shows or he pokes his head out on a particular day. And if he does, it means that the winter will not be as harsh, or it will finish early or something. And it's a great event, and they have big celebrations. But in the movie, what happens is he turns up at the Punxsutawney, and he's obviously interested in his researcher. And he finds her quite attractive, but because he's such a curmudgeonly kind of character, it's quite difficult for him to really chat her up and things. So what happens is the next day he wakes up, and in the background you have his radio going on, his alarm, and it's playing "I've Got You, Babe" by Sonny and Cher. And the thing was, the previous morning when he woke up, it was playing as well. So he finds this quite curious, and he gets up and he finds that he's reliving all the events that happened the day before. But he isn't. And this is the most important point. And this is a point that really is the best example of how people misinterpret my cheating the ferryman model. People fall into the trap of thinking cheating the ferryman is basically a variation on Friedrich Nietzsche's eternal recurrence or eternal return. And the idea that you live your life again in identical ways. This is not what I say. Far from it. Groundhog Day is a much better example. And interestingly enough, as an aside, the Russian language edition of my first book was entitled in Russian Groundhog Life. So clearly the Russian translators had realised that, there was definitely a theme here that could be applied. But moving back, so what happens is, if you watch the film, you will realise that he is the only person that's aware of the fact that everybody else is reliving the same day. But of course his actions are different. So although everybody else goes through the motions initially of it being the same day and making the same decisions, and one assumes then the overall world around him and the people he doesn't interact with continue making the same decisions and following the same life path that they did the day before. But with Connors it's different. Because whenever he comments to somebody or makes a comment, they obviously end up saying something different and therefore doing something different. Therefore, their life pattern, for want of a better word, has been changed by what Connors says to them. And that's very important. So it means that they change their day. For instance, on the first morning, I think there's the very amusing sequence where I think it's Mrs. Danvers, I think, the lady, the lady that runs the bed and breakfast that he's staying in, and Connors turns around and says, "Mrs. Danvers, what's your opinions on déjà vu?" And she turns around to something and assumes he's asking for some dish that he wants to eat. And she said, "Oh, I'm not sure we'll have that. I'll check in the kitchen." But the argument here is that she would not have said that the first day, because Connors wouldn't have said that. He would have said something completely different. So her response was different. And indeed, funnily enough, this is one of the most extraordinary areas of the research I was doing in my books, because I was contacted after I'd written my first book by a young postgraduate astrophysicist. No, he was a rocket scientist. He was doing rocket engineering. I won't give his name because it's up to him. It's private, so I don't want to quote his name particularly. But he again was a guy that came from Wirral, went to my old school as well, Wirral Grammar. And he contacted me because he'd read the first book, and he found it extraordinary because it was explaining a lot of the things he was experiencing. And he has, and still has as far as I know, because we're still in contact, he has an inoperable tumour on his pineal gland, which means that he perceives the world in quite a different way to what many of us do. And one of the things he perceives, which is particularly intriguing and why he contacted me, was that he has extraordinary déjà vu sensations. He has precognitive déjà vu sensations, where he knows what's going to happen for the next, usually I think around about 2 or 3 seconds. Okay. Now, when I met him, we were discussing this, and we were discussing the implications of this. Of course, being a scientist, he was really fascinated by the neurological aspects and everything else as well, which subsequently I've explored in my own research into the role of the pineal gland in terms of consciousness. But at that time, I was only aware of the pineal gland in general terms. But what was interesting was I turned around to him and I said, "So if you know what somebody's going to say to you, why don't you say something?" And he said something that really intrigued me and really set me thinking. Because he said, if I did, I would change the future. And again, using the analogy of Connors, this is exactly right. Because he would be in the circumstances that if, say, for instance, he was having a conversation with somebody and then suddenly goes into a déjà vu state. And he then turns around to the person he's talking to and said, "You're about to say this." They're not going to say it, are they? Because whatever they were going to say, they're going to respond to that with, "How do you know that?" or something similar, which means that the way the world should have progressed doesn't. And as he said, it means that he changed the future. He changes what would have happened into a totally new scenario. Now, of course, this is very much in keeping, as you know, in my writings, with Everett's many worlds interpretation, and the idea and the Hawking and Hertog idea of the top-down hypothesis of quantum mechanics, and the idea that every potentiality, every wave function is in existence, and our act of observation collapses that wave function to create that reality to accommodate the decisions we've just made. It's almost like we're living in a computer simulation of our lives, where everything that we can bring about is already programmed into the system. And literally our choices, just like in a computer game or an RPG game or in a VR game, every time we make a decision, the decision is then changes what the next part of the game becomes. So this is profoundly important. And this is what my point about Connors when he speaks with Mrs. Danvers or whatever her name is. So what he then does is he realizes that he has power, because he wakes up the next morning and again, it's the same day. He hears the radio, he hears Sonny and Cher singing again, and he realizes that he has a degree of power. Now, what I would argue, using an itladian analogy here, or applying my Damon Eidolon dyad to it, what I would argue is that what Connors is actually become is what I call a dyad, a Damon Eidolon dyad. He is an Eidolon that has access to his Damon's thought patterns and thought fields, which effectively means that he knows what the future is going to be, because he knows, having lived the day before, he knows how the day pans out, for him anyway, and for anybody else who tells him how their day has become. So he's in a position of precognition. And I argue, in Cheating the Ferryman, my hypothesis, this is what I argue takes place in life. That our Damon has lived this life many times and therefore knows what's going to happen. And this is what takes place here with Connors. So Connors effectively he's a Damon living in an Eidolon's life, and living it linearly and living it once every day. So just like the Damon does, he starts to realise that he has power. And this power is extraordinary. Because he means, so I've got Instagram messages coming through, he realises that he can influence people. And of course, when he starts doing this, he does it because he wants to gain advantage. He wants to bed the girl, basically. So he realises that over a number of days, for him, he can ask her questions, take her out, ask her questions about what her favourite movies are, what her favourite books are. And of course, the next day he takes her out again, and he's in this position whereby he can suddenly dazzle her, because he'll say, my God, that's my favourite book as well. But he's doing it for selfish purposes. Now, this is important because this is the hidden message of the film. And I discussed this with Danny when he was there. Because what happens is, as he lives the day more and more, he realises that doing it for personal gain isn't really working. It's not really what he really wants. So then he moves on, he progresses over many, many days. And Danny told me that he had planned that Connors would live that day thousands of times, thousands and thousands of times. Okay. So over a period of time, he realises that he can learn things. So he starts piano lessons. Then he knows how to play the piano. And he gets better day on day. He gets better and better and better. And he gets better at other things. And he realises he can influence other people's lives. So now he's learning. And by developing, he's becoming more aware. He's progressing. He's becoming a better human being. And then he has the situation whereby towards the end, before that, remember there's the sequence where he gets totally depressed and he tries to commit suicide. And he does all these weird things where he tries to kill himself, and he kills himself in so many different ways. And of course, that fantastic sequence, where he's, when your mother tells you the certain things you shouldn't do in life, and one of the things is driving along a railway track in a car with an oncoming train coming on. These kind of things. So that's the first thing. He gets depressed, and then he goes through all these different emotions. And then he starts to change completely, and he starts to then doing good for doing good's sake. He realises he can save people's lives. He realises, initially, I think it was when he meets Dan, I can't think of his name, Dan Rowan or somebody like that, the guy with the puddle, where he steps in the puddle, and he steps in the puddle every day, and he realises he can avoid stepping in the puddle because he knows he's going to step in the puddle. So it means he can manipulate his life, but he can help other people. And towards the end of the movie, he's running around the town, isn't he? He's helping the child that falls out the tree, and he saves him from breaking his leg, which means that child's life is changed totally. So child's life is changed. Not just his life, but that child's life, because presumably that child moves on to the next day in that iteration. But remember, there will be a myriad of other days where that child will have broken his leg. But there's one where he doesn't, and he moves on and his life changes. This is, again, you see what I'm saying with Cheating the Ferryman? and this idea? So he moves on and he gets to the position where he's running around town and he's trying to save people, but there's an old tramp which he fails to save. And he realises there are certain things he cannot control. Life and death, maybe. These kind of things. And when he's doing this, he's becoming a greater human being. And ultimately what happens then is, magically, for some unknown reason, the next day he wakes up, it's the next day. And he's moved on. Now, what is this really telling us, the inner message? Well, I'd say that what is happening is that Connors becomes a more advanced human being. He becomes what the Buddhists would call a bodhisattva, a person who has reached Buddhahood, a person who, through many, many lives, has become a perfect human being. Or, as I would argue, he's learned how to play the game. He's travelled along so many different paths, he knows how the game works. And that's how he's able to break out of the game, because he's exhausted all the paths, as you do when you play a third-person computer game. Because ultimately, you complete the tasks, and the game is completed. But you can go back into the game to play around with other things, because you know the environment, you know everything, so you can have fun. Now, is this what certain human beings actually do in life? Because I argue in Cheating the Ferryman that after we live our lives many, many times and follow every path we can possibly make, and remember, not just every path, but there's every path that will have been brought into existence by the decision of your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents. For example, had my grandmother not been ill and my mother made a decision, I'd have been born in Tasmania. So that's another life. An Anthony Peake that lived in Tasmania who would have had a totally different life to the one I've had, one assumes. May not have become a writer, may have become a sheep farmer, although I'm pretty hopeless at anything handy like that. But nevertheless, you follow my point here. Now, this idea is profoundly Buddhist, and I know a lot of people have argued that there is Buddhism within Groundhog Day. But it's not Buddhism, nor is it Hinduism, and there's a very important reason why this isn't. Remember, in Buddhism and Hinduism, they believe in reincarnation, where you are born as somebody else. You are incarnated as somebody else in another time, another place, somebody completely different. You're not reborn as yourself, which it says in Cheating the Ferryman. That's such an important point. Which means that when you die and you move on to a completely different life with no memories of your previous life. So you're in a position where you can't advance because you don't know the errors you made last time. And even if you did know the errors you made last time, you were a different person in a different environment whereby you will make different errors. You won't have the opportunity to put the errors right that you made last time. But Cheating the Ferryman is quite precise. You will be in a position whereby you can learn from your mistakes because your daemon will remember. As Connors remembers each day, your daemon remembers each life. And if its communication channels are effectively open or more open, it can guide you through this life and guide you through the game, like a game player guides the on-screen sprite as they go through. Okay? So this concept is very, very intriguing because it means that after many lives, there are certain people that can come back, but it's not reincarnation. It's eternal recurrence and eternal return. It is different. And I believe this is why my hypothesis is far more logical and makes far more sense than being reborn as somebody else, in my personal opinion. If you're going to develop, you develop. You can't develop if you're different people. You cannot do it. You can't even carry forward any of the learning you had in a previous life. Whereas the daemon amasses the learning of multiple lifetimes in order to guide and everything else, because the daemon is your immortal you. Now, very interestingly enough, I wrote a book a few years ago on J.B. Priestley, the great UK Yorkshire Bradford playwright and essayist and novelist. And one of his little known plays is called I Have Been Here Before. And this was written in 1937. And in this, he has a very similar concept to Groundhog Day, but more in keeping with Cheating the Ferryman and itladian. And in this play, he has a character called Dr. Gortler. And it's set in an inn up on the moors in Yorkshire. And they have guests for the weekend, as they always do. And they have a group of guests turning up, but this strange character turns up, and he's different. And he's Austrian or German, and he's called Dr. Gortler. And Gortler acts very strangely to the other members of the other guests. And you discover that the reason that Gortler is there is he's what I would call a bodhisattva. He's an equivalent of Connors. He has lived his life many times. And he remembers. So again, he's a dyad. He remembers what happened in the previous lives. His daemon is more in his life. But then again, I'd argue when you become a bodhisattva, you are a dyad. You're a unitary being. And what he does, he knows through his history that there's a couple in the hotel who are going to make a terrible mistake. I won't ruin the storyline for you, but he's there to make sure that they don't make this mistake. Now, could it be there are people living now who are Gortlers, who are bodhisattvas? There are people who are more advanced human beings because they've lived this life many times. And they know and they work behind the scenes. Are these what we would call what the Theosophists would call ascended masters, what Blavatsky would call an ascended master? Who knows? But the difference between myself and the Theosophists is this is scientifically based. This is based upon observation and science and people's experiences. It's not based on just an idea I plucked out the air and I think, wow, this is really good, let's just run with it. Or I'm not channeling it from the planet Tharg. But it is an intriguing point, because in my life, I have met two people that, on reflection, I think were bodhisattvas. I won't go into details about them, but they were very, very different. They were incredibly wise and all-knowing and very gentle and very caring and very kind. And I suspect this is what it's about. They go out of the game and they choose to come back into the game. Now, so we've discussed a couple of movies, movies and play. But also, there are other movies that also have this idea of cycles of time and the way we go back and come back again. And one of the movies that really fascinated me when I first saw it, for a lot of reasons, was Vanilla Sky. Vanilla Sky is very interesting. It originally was a movie called Open Your Eyes, which was Spanish. And when the movie came out, Tom Cruise was really keen to buy the rights to this movie, him and his associate, Karen Wagner. And they made an offer to buy it because Cruise really wanted to buy this movie. And I believe the reason that Tom Cruise wanted to make this movie was his own personal belief system, Scientology. Because in Scientology, you have a concept that they have something called the operating thetan. It's the idea that there is within all of us a shard of something greater that's trapped inside us. And with L. Ron Hubbard, he said there are various techniques which cost huge amounts of money that allow you to become what's called clear, which is getting rid of all the engrams, because they argue that you live your life many, many times, but as different people. And when you carry through each life, you carry through bad memories, engrams. And by clearing those engrams, you allow yourself, the thetan inside yourself, to come forward and makes you a more powerful human being. Obviously, there's no science behind that, but I'd argue that there are elements of Scientology, because I argue that Cheating the Ferryman and my hypothesis is true, in which case other people are going to come up with parts of it in one way. It sounds vain. I don't mean to be vain. People who know me, I'm not being vain here. But it has elements of it because it's partially correct. Okay, so Cruise maybe was interested in buying it to rewrite it and work with Cameron Crowe, the director, to get the ideas across. And again, in the film, what is happening is, effectively, the guy is dying, David Ames, who's the central character, and he's living his life again. And maybe living his life many, many times. Now, again, you watch the film, there's so many clever nuances in this movie. You know, there's the bit where he is in the he is in a bar, and there is this person who is outside the program, who needs to go into the program to guide Ames, because he's going slightly wrong. He's getting slightly confused. And this guy is in the bar with him, and they're having a conversation about living lives and everything else as well. And Ames turns around and said, "I don't believe a word you're saying here. Shut the F up." And as he says this, everything freezes around them, and all the people in the bar stop, which is exactly the same sequence, going back, that we had in A Matter of Life and Death, the Pressburger and Powell. So it's again the same kind of idea, and everybody freezes, which shows that he's in a simulation. And of course, in the movie, you know when he's in the simulation, when the split takes place, because the sky becomes vanilla. A lot of people don't notice this. There's a famous sequence where he drops the mask in the street, and you look up and the sky is vanilla coloured. And that's where you know that that's when the dream sequence starts, the end of life dream sequence starts. Okay. Now, there are some wonderful lines in there, and I love the line, the lovely, beautiful love line that is made between Tom Cruise and Penelope Cruz, who is and Penelope Cruz was the same character in the first movie, by the way, so she was in both. And she says, "We will do this when we are cats." And it's again, I just love that idea. I don't even know necessarily what it means, but I just think it's beautiful. But remember the final sequence. They're on the roof, and Ames has decided he's going to kill himself. And he realises that even the psychiatrist that's been working with him it's a figment of his imagination, it's a creation of his mind, and he can't do anything to stop him. Now, if you have a DVD of the movie or a Blu-ray, do something. Watch the end sequence where he jumps off, and there's this beautiful soundtrack by one of my favourite bands, the Icelandic band Sigur Rós. And the music is so dreamy, it's so perfect for the movie, it works so well. But Tom Cruise jumps off the skyscraper, and he's falling, and they're playing the Sigur Rós. As he starts falling, freeze frame it and go frame by frame by frame, because you'll see the hidden message in the film. There's a series of photographs, and you can only catch them by freeze framing them. They are photographs of the life of Cameron Crowe in sequence. So what is the message here as he's falling? He's having a panoramic life review. He's having a near-death experience. Again, I have no idea whether I'm the only person who spotted this, because, of course, I write about the panoramic life review. It's an integral part of my cheating the ferryman hypothesis. So somebody here, Cameron Crowe, whoever it was that came up with that idea, clearly has an inkling of my whole cheating the ferryman idea, the whole model. The people realise that this is the case. I'd then like to move on to another movie that has a similar theme as well, Run, Lola, Run, which is a fascinating movie of a young woman who's running to sort out an issue and a problem, and she's in a circle. She's trapped in a circle, and she keeps doing the same things over and over again. So again, it's a theme that you get in certain movies. And of course, more and more movies now are doing this circular theme. Tom Cruise again did it in one of his later movies. So here we have something quite extraordinary taking place. There is this kind of realization. And a movie that is little known in this genre, but I think is extraordinary, is Triangle. It was a little known British-Australian movie, I suppose. And again, it is great because it is totally, completely and utterly Cheating the Ferryman. You watch that film and you read my book. I won't ruin the movie for you, but it is so clever. You think you know what's going on, and then you don't. And then you realise it's again somebody, the writer, subliminally picking up the whole idea that I put forward, the science in Cheating the Ferryman. But there are many, many other movies, and I'm going to touch upon other themes. At the moment, it's the eternal return, the eternal recurrence, the coming back and living your life again and doing it again over and over again till you get it right. But I wanted here to just give you an introduction to how this functions and how this works and how it is subliminal within us all. This is why my books, when people come across them, they resonate so much, because they resonate with your daemon. It's an Eidolon reading the book, but the daemon is going, woohoo, yeah, this is it. The daemon is realising. Now, if more and more people can become aware of this, I've always wondered what could be the outcome of this. You know, because of course I argue that this is a simulation, and we have other writers, and I'm not alone in this, that say, you know, this is a simulation. But I'm the only one that's putting the bits together in a particular way and saying why and how it functions and how it works. And this is why me doing these things are so important, because it means that, you know, if I move out of this Bohmian IMAX, another term I use, which is in deference to David Bohm. And again, I use the term Bohmian IMAX very specifically because one of my favourite writers, although he irritates the hell out of me, is the late and great Daniel Dennett. And way back in about 1998-99, he wrote an incredible book called Consciousness Explained. Hubris ridden, because he doesn't explain consciousness. He has something he calls the multiple drafts hypothesis and theory, which doesn't really work for me. But that's an aside. But some of the things that he writes about in that book, I've used in my own books, things like, the phi experiment, PHI, and the idea of the way in which we seem to be able to perceive the immediate future. Quite clever in how that works in many ways. But Daniel Dennett had this concept which he called the Cartesian theatre. And the Cartesian theatre is the idea that somewhere in the head there is a place where it all comes together, where all the stimuli, your thoughts come together with your vision and your memories and your hearing, and they all come together. And the idea is there's a little homunculus, there's a little man in your head that is in like a studio, and he has these speakers and he has this TV camera. And as Dennett argues, but that's an infinite regress. The idea that there's a little man in your head, he would need a little man in his head, etc. ad infinitum. And he calls that belief system very much in error. And the idea of dualism, the idea that there is consciousness and reality, this idea of substance dualism, that the philosophers called it, put forward by René Descartes, by the way. I think, therefore I am, guy. Dennett turns around and he says, but then this Cartesian theatre is wrong. It doesn't work. And I agree with him. The Cartesian theatre doesn't work because our existence and our perceptions and where everything is housed is not in the brain. It's an information field that we tune into. It's outside of us, but it's also in us if that makes sense. And in the last chapter of my book, Cheating the Ferryman, I pull this all together for you to understand exactly what I'm coming to here. So I call it the Bohemian IMAX. So we have a pun on theatre and IMAX. A theatre, you sit there and, it's kind of like a TV screen and everything. Whereas the IMAX is bigger and louder and more extraordinary. And I called it the Bohemian IMAX because I'm making deference and reference to... God, that was good, wasn't it? Deference and reference. Yeah, okay, yeah, pretty good, that. With David Bohm, somebody I've acknowledged on a couple of occasions previously in these presentations. And David Bohm was a huge influence upon me and his concepts of the implicate and explicate orders. And again, David Bohm was a quantum physicist and also in elements of cosmology as well. And his ideas are extraordinary. And if you pull his ideas together with the simulation argument, with the holographic universe argument, suddenly you've got something really powerful. But again, as I say in these discussions, I'm the only person that's pulling these all together. There's people writing about the holographic principle. There's people writing about David Bohm, but they're not writing about near-death experiences. They're not writing about dimethyltryptamine. They're not talking to each other. I feel I'm the nexus point here. I'm the overlap point. I'm the person that's trying to pull it all together. And most people aren't listening. Maybe one day when I'm running through another run of the Bohemian IMAX, I'll get these ideas across quicker. Or maybe earlier. I don't know. But anyway, thanks everybody for listening. So I hope you found this of interest. And please, 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 follow up on it. Check out a lot of the movies I've talked about and comment about them in the comments box. Also, can I make a request as well? There's only been one review of my new book on Amazon so far, which is slightly strange and disappointing, because it's by reviews that people know your work is there and know about your opinions. Please, 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 if you've read the book or you're reading the book, please review it. Even if you hate it, I don't mind if you give it a 1 star. What I do mind is if you give it a 1 star and then you're unfair. Give it 1 star by all means, but please back up your arguments as to why you give it 1 star, because then I can respond to it. But, people have occasions given me 1 star and they've made these spurious stories as to why they don't like my books. Fine, if you don't like them, don't read them again. But these people seem to then not like my books and read them again and not like them again, which is rather strange. But if you can give reviews, it really helps and it gets the book out there, because in the final analysis, that's what I want, the book out there in the real world. I want people to know about this book. I want scientists to know about this book. I want philosophers to know about this book. I have been in discussions with Arcturus, and they've turned around to me and they've told me that they will endeavour to get the new book in popular science, and I'm hopeful that that will work. So that is profoundly important. So very much so. So if you can do that, that would be really, really good. And again, 2 weeks' time, I'll be doing another talk. I'll probably continue on the theme of the movies and maybe even novels and music. So catch it again next time. So again, thanks everybody for listening in, and hopefully our numbers will continue to get bigger and bigger as time goes on. But thanks very much, and I hope you found this of interest. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.